The NES shows its ugly side on NES Works episode 121.
It must not be forgotten. Because that child stands in silent judgment of us all.
Now here's a strange one, an NES game based on a Victorian novel. How highfalutin. Toho and Advanced Communication Corp really got weird here, not only in terms of their inspiration, but also with their execution. Jekyll and Hyde might be the most bizarre game we've yet seen on NES, which almost balances out the fact that it might be the worst. Don't worry, this doesn't threaten Kung Fu Heroes as my go-to punching bag for NES Works. For one thing, Jekyll and Hyde has such a high degree of infamy among NES collectors, thanks to the likes of AVGN, that it's become low-hanging fruit. Everyone knows it's a dire game that offers about 30 seconds of actual entertainment, and those 30 seconds come entirely from the title screen music, which appears to have been lifted directly from Tecmo's Rygar. An infinitely more entertaining adventure. At the same time, Jekyll and Hyde offers us a unique sort of wretchedness. The entire misbegotten adventure plays like nothing else on NES, or honestly like any other game I can think of. The closest comparison I could offer might be Dr. Chaos, which also involved a guy with a degree in higher education and ventures into a bizarre shadow realm full of monsters. But even then, Dr. Chaos played like a fairly traditional action game, a janky version of the Goonies 2. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde forges its own path. It sucks in wholly original ways, creating entirely new and never-before-seen ways to be truly miserable. You have to hand it to developer Advanced Communication Corp. They may not have had much luck creating a compelling piece of game design, but it certainly wasn't for lack of creativity. To be honest, to play Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is to experience sadness. Not just sorrow for yourself, though certainly the game absolutely radiates powerful curtains of ennui. Rather, your heart breaks for the team behind this disaster of a release. Can you imagine being the hapless game designer who found himself stuck with his project brief? Create a game about a 19th century novel that told the tale of a good man who became afflicted with a curse which caused him to transform into a cruel monster. Your first impulse might be to look for inspiration from the most popular work to have swiped from Robert Louis Stevenson's novel, Marvel's Incredible Hulk. Indeed, that seems to be the inspiration behind the game's primary action loop. The earliest Hulk stories generally revolved around Hulk simply trying to hide from society. "Leave Hulk alone" was his catchphrase. Not quite as punchy as the Thing's "It's clobbering time," but infinitely more relatable than something like "By the hoary hosts of Hoggoth." Yet people would harass Hulk nevertheless, mostly the military who wanted to blow him up because he was large, green, and possessed the secrets of the Gamma Bomb, driving him into the desert and peppering him with high-impact ordnance. Dr. Jekyll experiences a similar sort of existential torment, but in a different way than Hulk. Where both Dr. Jekyll and Dr. Banner Hulk out and become rage monsters when their stress level spirals out of control, no one really pestered Bruce Banner that much. Here, though, everyone seems to have it out for the human form of our hero in particular, not the monster. Children, gentlemen, dogs, birds, insects, spiders, gravediggers, archers, opera singers, even refined ladies, out taking an afternoon stroll. The one thing they have in common is that they hate the absolute hell out of Dr. Jekyll. Very nearly every living entity you encounter while walking through London attempts to hurt, harass, or harangue Jekyll. This raises a lot of questions about how good a man Jekyll actually was before he became afflicted with the curse of Hyde. It's like those dudes who complain about how all the girls they've ever dated were all psycho bitches. Like, maybe you should consider that the common thread in those relationships is you. Likewise, the fact that all of London has their sights set on ruining Dr. Jekyll's day tells me that maybe he's a real piece of crap. The objective of this game is to lead Dr. Jekyll to the church on the other side of town, where he can marry his beloved. Meanwhile, all of Victorian London has rallied to prevent this from happening. And that makes me wonder if they're all trying to protect some hapless woman from a lifetime of misery. I think there are more elegant ways to go about preventing a marriage than literally dropping cartoon bombs at the groom-to-be's feet, but this was a simpler time. Perhaps the 19th century British hadn't quite mastered the art of deadly sarcasm quite yet, and therefore found themselves resorting to cruder means. Dr. Jekyll himself cuts an unimposing figure. He's a well-dressed gentleman whose only goal in life appears to be walking from left to right all the way across the city until he reaches the church. He has no combat capabilities to speak of. Jekyll can wave his walking stick at those who beset him, but so far as I can tell, this has no offensive or defensive use whatsoever. The man can't even smack a spider hanging from its web line. Just an absolutely useless human. I have no idea what his prospective bride sees in him. Presumably, it was an arranged marriage. Aside from the well-dressed men who attempt to bloodily explode Jekyll with Acme brand bombs, few of London's aggressors actually do Jekyll any real harm. Instead, every indignity he suffers depletes his mental health, which is conveyed quite handily in the form of a meter beneath his health bar. Once Jekyll's sanity has reached rock bottom, he hides out and transforms into his alter ego. It's not really the most sensitive portrayal of mental instability you'll find in a video game. We are clearly a long way from Hellblade here. Now, you may think that changing form into Mr. Hyde would make for a more compelling video game than walking slowly to the right while being hassled by kids. This is, in fact, not the case. Rather than advancing across London as a rage monster who can brutally shred his transgressors, leaving a trail of rent limbs and displaced organs across the cityscape, Hyde instead becomes displaced in reality. His actions take place in a parallel universe that auto-scrolls in reverse. Here, Hyde needs to defeat bizarre monsters in order to recharge his sanity meter. This is difficult due to the terrible game design, but it becomes even more ridiculously challenging when you realize that the entire affair unfurls under an effective time limit. Hyde traverses the spaces that Jekyll has walked, in reverse, and if you end up scrolling further than Hyde has traveled, you are inexplicably struck dead on the spot by lightning. Game over. But this presumes that you can even live that long, while facing mobs of enemies with some of the most hostile hitboxes I've ever seen in a video game. Hyde's basic form of attack consists of a punch, which has very little range and appears to have a single pixel of effective attack impact. Punch a bad guy perfectly, and you'll destroy it. But even the basic bad guys, which appear to be hopping meatballs, move quickly, hit hard, and show up in huge numbers. Hyde can also fire something called a psycho wave, just like in the novel, a very limited ranged attack that gives you more survivability. And if you can somehow kill enough foes, you'll eventually revert to Jekyll form. Every monster Hyde destroys restores a bit of his sanity meter, and filling it back to max will reactivate his Jekyll form while regenerating most of the damage you've suffered due to the frustrating programming and aggressively harsh design. About the only good thing I can say for this setup is that the treatment of Hyde as an independent entity who inhabits his own chaotic realm presages the incredible Immortal Hulk series, making this a work of accidental genius. But something tells me that Al Ewing was not looking to this NES game for inspiration when he came up with the idea of the Green Door. I guess it also seems fitting that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the video game, feels as chaotic and evil as the realm that Hyde inhabits. It almost has a nice Castlevania-like visual style, but the action moves at a stuttery Micronix-like frame rate, and unpredictably changes speeds depending on the on-screen action. This is the only NES game I've ever seen where the action sometimes runs faster when tons of objects appear on screen rather than slowing to a crawl. As you advance through the final stage, dozens of what appear to be either barrels or wagon wheels come rolling across the screen at you, gradually increasing in speed and frequency. Weirdly, Jekyll moves more quickly as this happens as well, almost as though the programmers set everything on screen to pick up speed, rather than applying that trait to a single item. And it's not as though this is some paragon of thoughtful design. According to the cutting room floor, Jekyll and Hyde shipped on a more capacious ROM in Japan than in the US, forcing Advanced Communications Corp. To cut material. They went about this by removing 2 levels and replacing them with duplicates of previous stages, making a tedious and repetitive game even more so. But they didn't arrange the placement of enemies in those levels, which I assume is why you'll sometimes hear yowls of cats that never appear, and see opera singers who never actually unleash a barrage of musical notes. Still, I feel like the developer was trying to do something interesting with a concept that didn't lend itself easily to video games. They failed more bitterly than I can begin to express, but bless them, they did try. You can see their misguided ambition in all the systems that don't quite work. For example, Jekyll can duck into doors in order to evade foes here. This accomplishes nothing and appears to have no value to the gameplay, but it seems like something that should be of use in some way. Similarly, Hyde can earn coins by defeating meatball monsters and other chaos entities, but these coins have no value outside of paying the opera singers to shut up. It's really weird. It feels like there was a much bigger design document at play here, but we ended up with this. The core action literally just consists of Jekyll walking left to right and jumping over hazards, but the challenges are arranged in such a way that it's literally impossible to avoid everything, especially as multiple threats come along on different vectors all at the same time. Trying to avoid a dog that dashes at you circles back, then reverses course a second time before dashing off screen, while also evading a bird with serious IBS issues, carpet bombing the city with brown soft serve, and scrambling to get out of the range of a short fuse explosive which will cause a cat to freak out and dash at you, is the kind of thing that you can only pull off if you're one of those outlandish savants of games done quick, who perfect their skills at a single game by living a monastic existence that consists of nothing but practice for that one game and self-flagellation, which in this case are one and the same action. The Hyde transformation sequences should be a welcome release from the tension and frustration of playing as Jekyll, but they're so sloppily programmed and tilted so badly against the player that it just drags out the experience. As you can see from the footage here, I ended up using an invincibility cheat to allow Jekyll to make his way across London without fear of transformation. This process took nearly half an hour. Half an hour of toilsome, boring, unfair game design. Half an hour that would rapidly balloon into hours if you had to deal with the constant hide sequences. Like I said, playing this game makes me sad for the creators. This is a Bandai release, so I have no doubt that they were hired to create this game in a matter of weeks with a team so small you could count the staff members on a single hand. It's one of those games where you just know that some fresh-faced 20-something went into the thing bursting with bold ambitions and interesting ideas, and then had about 10% of the time needed to even begin to realize them, let alone perfect them. Yes, the heart breaks. For them and for any 80s child who saw that rad-as-hell Dayglow cover and thought, wow, I need to own this game, talked their parents into buying it instead of Ninja Gaiden, and then decided that they actually hated video games forever. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is bizarre in terms of its content, its structure, and the fact that Japanese film studio Toho decided to commission a game based on this novel without any contemporary anime or film adaptation to tie it to, at least so far as I can determine. This is not a good game, but dear God, is it a fascinating mistake. And that's certainly more than I can say for Kung Fu Heroes. Arriving at the same time, we have a second game about a spindly little guy who transforms into a huge rage monster. Amagon takes a lighter touch than Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but that doesn't mean it's any better or more fun. Still, one bad game about a transforming dude does not necessarily fail for the same reasons as another. Like, the NES version of Altered Beast is terrible, but it's terrible for entirely different reasons than Transformers Convoy no Nazo. So it is with Dr. Jekyll and Amagon, where the former fails for the sheer spectacular wretchedness of its controls, the dull and repetitive nature of its stage layouts, and its bizarrely misbegotten duality, Amagon stinks for entirely different reasons. There's actually no universe in which you could turn Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for NES into a good game. Amagon, on the other hand, actually misses being a good compelling action game by just a few narrow mistakes. For starters, its dual character transformation concept actually seems quite well thought out. It presents a fairly compelling risk-reward scheme that forces you to weigh the benefits of transformation versus its penalties. By default, you play as a skinny little dude whose plane has crashed on a jungle island. Armed with only a machine gun and 300 bullets, you need to make your way across the island in order to escape. But if you can collect a certain power-up during your travels, you can choose to transform into a massive muscle man who plays quite differently than your scrawny little soldier. Your burly form can shrug off a fair amount of damage from enemies, which is quite a contrast to your standard guy. The soldier form holds true to the classic run-and-gun mold. Like the warriors of Contra, a single hit will do him in. However, your brawny incarnation lacks any sort of ranged attack. Your sole form of offense, when transformed, is a powerful uppercut that forces you to move in incredibly close to enemies in order to connect, putting you at greater risk of taking damage. On the other hand, your uppercut has unlimited ammunition, as it were, meaning that you can attack infinitely. This, in turn, is balanced by the fact that enemies don't drop any sort of icons when you blast them in muscle form. When felled by bullets, enemies frequently drop score bonuses, which increase your power, and tie into the complex scoring system, which sometimes appears to reset when you die. In addition to extra points and transformation power-ups, enemies also drop ammunition refills and occasionally a precious 1-up. Since Amagon is a massively challenging game with no continue system outside of a secret continue if you can somehow reach World 4, and only 3 single-hit kill lives to rely on, you really can't afford to pass up those extra men. So this adds another consideration to playing in Ubermensch form. Sure, you may be able to withstand more damage as a superhero, but you may be undermining your overall chances by denying yourself those crucial life ups. This is actually a really strong hook for a game. Both forms have obvious advantages, but also come saddled with significant drawbacks. That's good design. And if the game itself were a little more refined, Amagon would have a strong chance of being remembered as a plucky B-tier NES demi-classic, a trademark of Vic Tokai, the publisher responsible for Amagon's initial Famicom release. Unfortunately, the worst thing about playing Amagon is, well, playing Amagon. Everything about Amagon feels just a little bit off. Your controls feel a little too loose, your jump mechanics just a little too quirky. Your attacks have weird hitboxes, making it difficult to connect with targets, especially your machine gun, which burns through ammo way too quickly due to the sheer unlikelihood of actually hitting swiftly moving targets with it. And most of all, despite being a 3 lives no continues sort of affair, Amagon treats level design and enemy placement like some sort of Kaizo game hack. Monsters appear in ways, and at times, that absolutely will wreck you. It's all far too effectively devastating for this to be accidental. Developer ICOM clearly set out to create a game that hurts players in ways they least expect. The design philosophy here reminds me a little bit of Mega Man 9, especially in the way identical-looking enemies will sometimes exhibit distinct behaviors depending on where they spawn. Certain creatures will act one way when you first encounter them, but a stage or two later, they'll somehow add new actions to their routine. And they always do it in a way that deliberately wrecks your day, with unexpected twists tailored to that specific situation. It's cleverly cruel, and I admire it. But I don't think it works as well here as it did in Mega Man 9, because it's not nearly as forgiving. Gotcha-style surprise attacks in a game that defaults to single-hit kills and offers no continues is a little much, even within the infamously wicked NES library. It's an almost, but not quite good debut for both developer ICOM and publisher Sammy, later of Sega Sammy fame, which more or less defines their entire NES legacies. The two companies would collaborate again a few years later for the good but not amazing Vice Project Doom, another game with great aspirations, interesting ideas, and middling execution. With a little fine-tuning and a little more clemency, Amagon could have been a classic. As it is, the game expects players to spend way too much time replaying the first stage or two over and over again until they come to terms with their demands and surprises. As for what Nintendo Power said, well, you'll get a pack watch, mister, and that's good enough. Next time on NES Works, get to the choppa and far away from these crappy games.